Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This is Overland Weekly, episode number 7. My name is Davey, along with John. We are your host. And John, when were we here? Last week?
It feels like certainly hope so.
Yeah.
I think I've had a kid since then. You've gotten your dog groomed. A lot of stuff's happened.
It's been busy the last 6 months, but with that said, yes, congratulations. John has a healthy baby girl. That's the most important thing. And but we are anxious to get back out, both here on the show and actually get back out on the trail in 24. And we did. We actually went. We didn't just talk about four-wheeling and Instagram and send each other reels. We actually went out on the trail and went overlanding. So let's see if I think I have this video from that. So for those that are watching this that are not from around here, this is at Coalmont OHV, which there is a Coalmont episode from about a year ago, but we had a much different experience there. This time the water levels were a little high, as you can see, but we had a really good time out there with everybody. Here comes Josh.
Y'all should recognize that truck.
That's right. That's right. A reader's ride truck. Yeah.
Yeah, there's Steedster. Yeah, we had a great turnout. A lot of folks showed up to camp. A lot of folks showed up to wheel. It was fun. You cleaned your truck on the water crossings and then got it extremely muddy in the mud right after.
At 100%. Yeah. So I will be back at Coalmont this Saturday, STLCA club ride back there again. So this might come out before then. So if you're watching, listening, we'll be there on Saturday. And if you are there or we see you on the trail somewhere, holler at us if you want some of this sweet new Overland Weekly swag. We got patches. We got stickers.
Mm-hmm.
We got wind down tools, also known as a bottle opener.
We're for real now. So we have patches.
We're for real. Yeah. You guys weren't thrilled about the stickers, but man, everybody wants the patches. So there you go. I guess that's an Overland thing. All right. So we've got a guest tonight. We're going to get into that, and John, we were talking earlier. This is going to be a very interesting episode around a topic that maybe historically is not the sexiest thing. We're going to talk about bump stops, guys, and and when you talk about building rigs, people talk about wheels and tires and lift kits and suspension and sliders and all this stuff, and then and I got to get a set of bumps, or I need to lower my bumps, or whatever it is. It's kind of this. I don't want to say forgotten, but it really kind of is, and it just hadn't been very sexy, and that is until now. So Patrick Perry from Perry Parts is joining us. Hey, Patrick.
Hey guys, how you doing? Thanks for having me on the show.
Welcome.
And Patrick, you have created. You are bringing the sexy back in the bump stop department. Is that what's going on here?
I like to think so. Yeah. I'm making, so our suspension is dynamic, right? Your suspension is designed to move. And pretty much everything else on the market is a rubber spring in some way, shape, or form. And I have a background in additive manufacturing, and I wanted to, the way the product came about is a whole different story, but I wanted to change up the game and try something new. And it caught on, and it stuck. And so we've been building off of that and iterating and tuning, and yeah, it's been great.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your background there. So I know you just had a big move across the country. So you grew up on the East Coast, right?
Yep.
So the young Patrick growing up, were you one of those kids that were people were like, "You're going to be an engineer when you grow up"? Were you always the tinkerer?
Yeah, I took apart the TV, I took apart the microwave, I took apart the computer. I knew for sure I was going to be a mechanical engineer before I even applied to school. Yeah, I was always working on cars. My friends and I, when I was a kid, we were working on cars in the driveway. We caught the driveway on fire a few times. Like, you know, you got to learn you got to break stuff, right? And so, yeah. And then, yeah, went to engineering school up in upstate New York, Clarkson University, for mechanical engineering. And while I was there, I spent some time at General Electric in the aviation team. And at GE, I was working partially on some of the stuff for the 3D printed fuel injectors on the new GE 9X and the LEAP engine platform. And then I went to Apple, and I spent the last 6 years at Apple as a manufacturing designer. So we got these pretty sculpted shapes from the design team, and it was, how do you make that? Where do you make that? Tuning the process, and you know, it was all revolving around process. And
so was Apple always a goal? Did that opportunity just kind of arise? How did all that transpire?
So I originally got an email about them hiring for internships, and I had deleted it because I just figured it was an email looking for software engineers. Because I was like, Apple doesn't hire mechanical engineers; everything's made somewhere else, right? And then I was looking for an email from a professor. I was looking for something, and I saw that email, and it was just a bit of a like, wonder what software engineers make. And I clicked on the email, and it was like looking for mechanical engineers. I was like, well, if I just have to send a resume in, you know, might as well see where that goes. And I had a really awesome conversation with the recruiter, which then turned into my manager, and then I got a full-time offer back, and yeah, it was a really, really super cool experience. That's
awesome.
Yeah, some really, really awesome people, cool projects, but it's very different than being able to do your own thing.
Sure. So you pack up, you move across the country. You're living out in Silicon Valley, right? So,
yep.
How does off-roading, how does overlanding fit into that? Did you already have a truck built? Were you already into the scene? Did it happen out there? Tell us about that.
So I had a Subaru Outback that I had put Rally Art or Rally Armor. They have a aluminum skid plate kit for the Outback, and it was actually, I missed the car. It was a turbo. I lifted it an inch. I had the skid plates, and I took it out. It was a stick shift.
There you go.
I took it out to Hollister Hills OHV Park, and got myself into way more trouble than I should have been in the Outback. And I had a bunch of people giving me all sorts of shit. But the flip side of it was there were people that were like just so stoked to see that there, right? Like, you know, there's the memes of like you get to the end of the trail and there's the Ford Mustang parked in the corner, right? Like that was me, right?
Yep.
But then I had a coworker that he had a 4Runner, and I had another buddy who had a Jeep. The Jeep guy told me about GX 470s because they were starting to come up, and I was eyeballing 4Runners for a while, but they were always pretty steep price wise. And then I found out about this 4Runner that you could buy that was most likely babied. It had leather seats, and it was guaranteed to have a V8. I was like, that's hard to argue with, right? And so I bought my GX in 2019, 2020, and had it ever since. It's on its second motor. It's third or fourth rear diff.
Wow. Okay.
So yeah, I got a couple of them for free at one point, and I was like, well, I'm not going to upgrade to the 8.2 unless I kill a couple of 8s, right? So, yeah.
You followed that for sure.
Yep. I am on my last one, so I'm either going to go 8.2 or, well, that's probably the only path forward, honestly. So
what happened to the first motor?
So I hydrolocked it.
Ooh.
And I actually have the video. I'll email it over to you guys, because the best part is, as I'm coming out of the water, you can hear the connecting rod go through the block. I drove through this water. So I drove through this water crossing once, and then I backed up. I was like, that was really cool. We should get it on video. And dropped a friend off on the other side of the water. And it wasn't even deep. It was maybe like, I don't know, 6 or 7 inches. But then I hauled through it the second time.
Wide open.
And I didn't and I didn't have the liners on the inside of the fenders anymore. And I ingested a ton of water. I mean, like, the airbox was full. And I was able to get it started again, and I had to keep my foot to the floor to keep it running. And I dumped the transfer case from neutral into low, and we got it to the side of the road, and then we got a U-Haul and trailered it all the way home.
Wow.
Yeah, it wasn't fun. It's a hell of a story, though. It was a 9-hour round trip the next day getting it back.
Yeah. Funny enough, I did the exact same thing in a Nissan Maxima in college. Exact same thing. Like, oh, this is a big puddle. Let's hit it really hard. And that was the last time I ever drove that car. 6 inches of water. Yeah.
And I'll say, like, there's no better way to know how to work on your car than to just buy a motor off eBay and have it shipped to your house, and then just like, well, I guess I'll get an engine crane. Like, I guess I'll, like, you just start to kind of piece it together, right? But yeah, it was a fun experience.
Nice. So, so you're at Apple. You're wheeling out there in California. You spent 5-6 years there, and so I'm assuming you were out there when you were planning a wheeling trip, if I get this right, and you were waiting on a part that wasn't going to come in time. And that kind of leads to your story today. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So I have always had a 3D printer for the better part of, or for more than 10 years now. I've had a printer in some way, shape, or form. And we had this trip coming up, and I had broken a different bump stop product. I'm not naming names. I broke it, and I didn't want to go out for a trip without it, because it's you can, but it's not fun to be bottoming out all the time.
Yeah.
And so I just said, you know what? I just whipped up a simple conical shape, and I drilled a hole in the bottom of it, and I put a bolt in there, and I screwed it onto the frame. And I remember when we got out there, and we were like, this is better than it should be. It was a lot better than we expected. It was definitely a little bit too soft, that first iteration. But it worked, and it was a great, like, wow, this might be something, right? And so then I changed things up a little bit. I made them stiffer. The really cool part about the tech is you can, by modulating the density, you can change how stiff the part is. And so I kept on tuning that, and I worked to, figure out what felt best to me. And then I was like, well, hold on, I've got this enclosed volume of air. Can I do something with it? And I think I could actually, I remember hearing the air being squished out of the part. You can hear like a every time you hit them. And so that's where the idea for the compression damping came in, was, okay, if you can control that fluid in the same way that you can control the oil in a shock, you should be able to tune the properties of compression and rebound. And you can. And so that was really cool. But yeah, it all started with it was a Band-Aid, right? It was I really want to hit the trails. Let's figure something out. Yeah.
So did this, I assume you went on that trip, and then you come back and you start iterating and making revisions for your own vehicle. And then what happened? Does one of your buddies say, hey, can I get a set of those? Or where did you start to think, oh, there is a commercial potential to this?
Yeah. I've always really liked, I've always liked the entrepreneurial angle, mostly because I really like talking to customers, and I kind of enjoy the customer service angle, which is surprising. Well, because a lot of people don't, right? And I didn't expect that I would.
Especially mechanical engineers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Source mechanical engineer.
And I launched it on the GXOR Facebook group. And it was basically, it was, I wanted to share something that I've been working on. I had previously posted on there, I made a tire carrier for the rear door, and I just posted like, hey, here's how I pieced this together. Here's the bill of materials. Like, you can make it yourself. And this one was kind of more like, hey, I want to get this out there and I want people to try it. This is the part. There's a lot that I'm still trying to figure out, or that I was at the time. And so I said, no questions asked warranty. If you break them, tell me about it so I can iterate. But also just having that constant feedback loop with people, because if you can iterate and you can do it without the extreme lead times of tooling and molding, et cetera, if you can just iterate and tune and approach it more flexibly, then you can get closer and closer to a more perfect product. And so that's kind of how it went about. That's how I launched it. And then it was, people were coming out of the woodwork for, I had people be like, oh, I'm gonna buy them. I'm gonna buy the 4Runner ones and see if they fit my Land Cruiser. And hey, they didn't. I had to cut them down and I changed the shape. And I was like, okay, like, shoot me a couple photos and some measurements. I'll send you some new ones. And they're like, yeah. I'm like, yeah, why not? Like, and you just kind of keep going, right? So, yeah.
So how many 3D printers did you have at your house when you built your first set? Okay.
One. Yeah.
And now?
And 21.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
So I have 14 right now that are running for bump stops specifically, and then I took 7 down to work on something new that I'm working on. And they're not really 3D printers anymore. They're more just like an XYZ motion system and a dispense system. I can show you that a little later if you'd like to take a look at it. But so the first day we got, sorry.
I was going to say,
the first day we got a whole bunch of orders, and it was like, I've built out a schedule, and I'm like, here's roughly when I can get parts out the door. And then like,
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
So those are printers behind you now, is that correct?
They are.
Yeah.
So
wow.
the printer's actually all this business down here. This is a standoff tube, and then the Home Depot bucket is the hopper for the pellets. So they're not traditional 3D printers. I actually print directly from injection molding pellets, and those pellets, you need to be gravity fed. And so you need that height to get the gravity feed down to the print head. And that's one of the big things with the new Gen 2 products that I just launched recently, is being made from that industrial grade material.
Do you want to, tell us, let me pull this up here. Talk about these changes from Gen 1 to Gen 2.
Yeah, so it all started with material. So the reason for the switch in material was twofold. One, the suppliers for 3D printing filament, I found a ton of variability. And what I mean by that is, like, I had patch wheels hard, right? Cruiser patch. We were talking about him before we started recording. You mean
the guy that just rolled his 100, for those that aren't familiar.
It's almost an understatement to say he wheels hard.
Yeah. And I love customers like that, because it's like, if you push it to its limits and you can give me that feedback, like, that's awesome. And his are holding up great. But then I had a couple in that first couple of batches that would go out, and they'd be like, I had an issue almost immediately. And I was like, well, that doesn't make sense. That's got to be material variability, especially when you've got these totally different ends of the spectrum. Like, one guy is going really easy and he had an issue, and the other guy is going hard and is doing fine, right? And so I said, this needs to be something that I figure out, right? This variability is not something that I can tolerate. And so I reached out to Covestro, which is, they're a US-based polymer manufacturer. And they're awesome because they hooked me up with an applications engineer, And him and I spent hours on the phone talking through it. And for a little while, I was kind of a little bit like, I didn't want to completely divulge what I was doing because of the patent. I didn't have the patent pending status yet. I didn't want to like totally unpack everything. And we eventually got to this point. He's like, so what are you doing? I'm like, I'm extruding. He goes, okay, what's the cross section of the shape that you're extruding? I'm like, it's a 0.4 millimeter hole. And he just stops. He goes, what are you making? Like, and so I ended up, I bought a ton of this material because that's the minimum order you can buy. And then I had to figure out how to actually work with it. And so designed the print head. I found a guy who was working on a project for these print heads. And so it's a literal miniaturized injection screw.
Oh, wow.
Pull this down.
Oh, yeah. So it's a little miniaturized injection molding screw. And then that goes along with a corresponding barrel. And then I made some changes of my own to make it suitable specifically to my material. Going down a whole material rabbit hole. I'm sorry, I'll pull it back up to how that actually turns into the product. So that was really awesome. And it enabled one, consistent, reliable, and really high performance materials. Not only is the material stronger, but it's very repeatable. And I was buying out my old suppliers. They were constantly out of stock.
Oh, wow.
And I was the lion's share of their business. And they had no plans for expansion. And I said, well, I plan to expand. So if you don't, I need to find something else to move on to regardless. And then the second layer to that, so we've got this new material, right? And the new material is softer. And that is actually really nice because, so if you look at the cross section of one of the Gen 1s, there's a whole lot more empty space in there because if you made this all fully dense, it would be too stiff. So with the softer material, you can make the part a lot denser. There's a whole lot more there, right? And what that allows you to do is, for a given amount of material, it's not only stronger, but there's also more of it. And so it's a win-win in terms of strength and durability. Plus, you've got all the other benefits that I mentioned earlier. So, yeah, and that's how Gen 2 came about. There's a couple other tweaks with respect to porting, especially on the front bump stops. But the Gen 2s have been, they look very similar from the outside, and they're made fundamentally totally differently, which is really awesome. So
that's fantastic. That's so cool. Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
I wasn't aware of anyone doing pellet 3D printing like that. And I
didn't even know it was a thing at all.
Yeah. I mean, pellets are what they feed into the process for making filament. And so, you have to be able to turn that into, you have to be able to go from pellet to cylindrical. And so I figured you just make that cylindrical on your part. So,
yeah.
Right. You just miniaturize the whole thing.
Yeah. That's awesome. You just took out an entire layer of an industry.
Yeah. Well, and so by taking out an entire layer, right, you take out that entire supply chain challenge, right, of dealing with someone to turn it into filament. The other really cool thing is by taking out that, you have one more melt and cool cycle that you've taken out of the processing for the material. And every time you melt and then cool a polymer, you lose material properties a little bit every time, but it adds up. And so by taking one whole melt out of that entire process, you've improved your parts durability a little bit too. So
that's awesome. That is awesome. So we've been talking about bump stops a lot, which is fantastic. But for those folks who may not know exactly what a bump stop is or what it does, especially in an off-road application, could you just kind of explain that?
Yeah, totally. So a bump stop engages at the very end of your suspensions travel. And the intent behind OEM bump stops is to limit travel as cheaply as possible. And so if you look at the OEM part, actually, can you give me 1 sec? I have one right over here. Just go grab it. Oh, actually, I take it back. I shipped them out for third-party testing. So if you look at the OEM bump stop, it's this metal cup, right? And then there's just a molded little hockey puck on the top, right? Or it's actually inside the cup. And that's all it is. And if you look at it from the OEM's perspective, a stamped piece of sheet metal, dirt cheap. Shoot some rubber in there and ship it. And that's great. It serves the purpose. But if you're wheeling and if you're going off-road often, you're using those bump stops more often. And the issue with the OEM solution is you're dissipating all that energy over a very short amount of space. And so the OEM bump stops, they don't compress very much, and they can reach a really high peak force very quickly. And that makes it harsh. And so the intent behind every aftermarket bump stop solution is to dissipate that energy over a longer distance. In the same way as jumping out of an airplane and landing with or without a parachute would be, one would be a little easier than the other, right? It's the same idea here, but for your suspension. Mm-hmm. So
that's awesome.
And for the frequency that you engage your bump stops off road, they are one of the biggest bang for your buck suspension upgrades that you can do. It's a 20 or 30 minute upgrade in the driveway. You might not even have to jack the truck up.
Yes,
it's quick, it's easy, and it's worth it.
And that's what I was going to say. This is something that, we've got a lot of people that watch or listen that are kind of new to off-roading or even working on anything automotive in general. And if you are watching this, you can change your bump stops. Yes. Like any of us will be happy to walk you through it on a phone call. It is as simple as can be.
You may need a very large channel wrench, but other than that, it's the only thing that you might worry about is shearing that bolt inside of the mount. Which
don't scare them off now, John. I'm trying to encourage people here.
No, it's very easy. And anytime anybody lifts their truck, I'm like, "Do you have bump stops?" And they're like, "No." And I'm like, "Do it. It'll literally change your ride." And they're like, "Nah, no." And I'm like, "Please just buy them, put them on." And they do. And they're like, "What? Like, why isn't this a thing? Why doesn't everybody know about this?" So, so there are a few offerings, a couple other different brands. How do your bump stops, at least in your opinion, stack up against them? Like, what sets them apart? I know you've talked about all the design and the intent behind it, but directly applied or directly competing against them, like what does yours have that like Timbren or Durabump or Wheelers may not?
Yeah, so I've sent parts out for third-party testing, and I've also done the same testing here in-house, and I'm able to measurably see a performance difference with respect to the amount of rebound damping and compression damping of my part. So one, they're truly active. So when you compress, this is awesome. So when you compress my bump stops, they are stiffer under more rapid compression, and they are softer as you compress them slowly. And the benefit there is, so they are taller than OEM, and if they were too stiff, they would limit travel. But by having that dual rate effectively, it's not even really dual rate. A better way to put it is just active, right? Compression damping. By having that compression damping built in, then you're able to really get every inch of articulation out of your vehicle. And that's the win here, is if you really want to be able to fully utilize your suspension in high flex situations, you got one tire up on a rock and the other down a gully, that's where these excel. And the last part is with respect to rebound damping. So if you imagine your bump stop as a spring, which is part of what it does, it's at the end of your travel and you hit that spring. If that spring then passes all that energy back, right, in basically 0% rebound damping, then you end up with all that energy going into your shock. And your shock is meant to handle that, but it's working harder than it has to. And your shock is also tuned to dampen or to damp your spring. And so by having this additional spring, which is much stiffer at the very end of your travel, if it doesn't take some of the energy out of the equation, then your suspension has to deal with it. And that's another area where this product excels. When you compress our bump stops, you lose that air internally, which then means it doesn't spring back as quickly. And so you basically dissipate some energy from the system, allowing your system to be a little bit more controlled.
That's extremely interesting. Davey and I were actually talking about the rebound damping, and I was wondering how, without being necessarily attached to the suspension, like on both sides, how it would impact or even have a rebound damping component. And you just answered
it's less that
every single question that I had. Yeah, because it's not necessarily that you're holding on to the suspension and assisting with the rebound. It's that it's not acting literally as a spring, as you said, and pushing it back down, thereby adding to the system and adding that additional force that the shock would have to deal with that it's not designed to, as you said. So it makes total sense that it's less of it, like basically removes itself in part from the system as like an impact back down in the travel. So it's ideal because it allows the shock to do what it was designed to do and just kind of helps soften the ride, soften the approach to the limit of travel, which is the intent of the bump stop. So that's awesome.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's
that's really cool.
A good analogy would be like a traditional bump stop is like having a spring on your control arm. And these bump stops are like having a little mini coilover, right? You've got a spring, you've got a damper, it's all right there. So that's a good way to describe it.
Yeah.
What are we looking at in this comparison video?
Oh man, this is old. I love this. You guys did some digging.
This basically illustrates what we're saying in a way.
It does, exactly. So what you're seeing here is I built a rig with I was 180 or 270 pounds, a good bit of weight on the back of a swing arm, and I bolted it to the side of my garage. Then I just set up a camera.
Of course you did, yeah.
I set up a camera and I just dropped all these, right? And then I played them back and I overlaid all the videos right on top of one another. And the intent here is just to demonstrate how much bounce back or how much energy is removed from that system. And if you had absolutely zero damping, right, the swing arm would bounce back to exactly where it started. It's like the pendulum problem in physics. But when you're removing energy from the system, you bounce back less. And so that was the intent behind this advertising. I'm getting a little better at the video editing lately, but
yeah, play it again. I want to.
All right, let me back it up here.
So I mean, it's pretty dramatic. It's not even like it's close.
It's substantial. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. So how, like, based on your experience with the bump stops and all of the different iterations, let's say I have like a 0 to 2 inch lift, 33 to 35 inch tires. Like how does the lift height and then also the tire size affect which bump stop you might want, or if you even want a bump stop?
Yeah. So I think that regardless of the suspension setup, you will almost always want a bump stop. It's just, I think we talked about it before, it's a really low entry, high performance upgrade. With that said, there's a lot of different permutations for how you can set up your truck, right? And what I've found is that limiting or matching your bump stop to your tire size in the front, because usually we're most restricted by tire size on the front of IFS vehicles. And then in the back, the feedback that I've gotten from a lot of people, myself included, is that 35s actually aren't too much of a challenge in the back with a little bit of work in the inside of that fender. And really what we do is we differentiate between long travel and standard travel rear shocks. A long travel rear shock is a shock that has a longer shock body and a longer shock stanchion. And the intent there is to give you more down travel at the expense of a little bit of up travel. And so that loss of up travel is where you need a longer bump stop to protect the shock from being bottomed out prematurely. And then in terms of bumps per vehicle. So one of the really awesome things about my process is that it costs me virtually nothing to change designs, other than my time, the time to design it and the time to iterate. And so there's no reason for me not to make the absolute best product for every specific vehicle platform that I support. And so what that means is that if you've got a Taco and you have a Tacoma versus a Tundra, they're very different vehicle weights, right? And subsequently, your bump stop you might feel that your Tundra bump stops on a Tacoma would be too stiff. And that was some feedback that I got really early on. They're direct bolt-on, identical parts, but my Tacoma ones are softer. And the reason for that is Tacomas are lighter. And you don't need that much bump stop, and it makes for a better ride experience. So that's one example of tailoring everything to be perfectly suited for the vehicle that it's designed for.
That's awesome. And what is the best way that you've been able to do that? Do you just have folks offering, or are you reaching out? I know that you mentioned the GXOR page, but like for 100 series, we're a little bit of a niche group. For Tundras, I don't even know where I would go to talk to Tundra people, unfortunately. So how are you like reaching out and getting these customers to help with the design iterations?
So my official policy is that if you help me bring a product to a new vehicle platform, you get a free set of bump stops. And that's worked pretty well so far.
Yeah.
And so I've been able to break into the Jeep market with that and some of the Chevy stuff. Nissans are coming out in the next week or two.
Oh, fantastic. That's awesome.
So yeah, and people love that. In terms of, it makes people want to kind of step up and volunteer to try this, because there is a bit of work on their end too. They have to test fit, they have to give me feedback, and I'm a lot better at it than I used to be, but there still might be one or two iterations, right? Mm-hmm. The other part of it, and this is where it gets really cool, is I now have the hardware to test this stuff. And one thing that I've been doing is I've been making these little bucks. And what these do is I can now characterize the spring rate of different structures and different densities. And I can now have that modeled. So now I can just say plug and play. I know this vehicle's weight and I know the control arms leverage ratio. Done. I know what I need to design. And that makes it, you can put numbers behind it, and you can really start to correlate things a lot better.
Yeah, I was in my head as you were saying what you were saying. I was like, now he's got the suspension dynamometer. Like, he can calculate out how he wants them to be based on weight and how it's going to, how he wants it to behave. So you just answered my question before I even had a chance to ask it, which is, it's awesome. It's so cool that you brought like such a pure engineering approach to this, and it's working. Because I mean, in theory, you could take it to any vehicle model. I mean, we have a video.
The Miata? Have you seen the Miata?
Yeah, we have that video. So I used to own Miata. I was a
right
huge Miata nerd, and I really wanted to make a rally Miata. So, Davey, pull that one up. And
yeah, let me get that up.
Testing buddy with the Perry Parts bump stops, and I'm so excited. Can I go much faster in the bumps? I mean, no, but it's so much more comfortable. I'm doing like an indicated maybe 25. It's just, I don't feel like the whole car is gonna fall apart, so I'm so excited! Woo! Oh, both hands on the wheel.
That's amazing. I mean, you literally made bump stops for a Miata.
Like, yeah.
So cool.
And I've got them in my mountain bike. I've got them in my dirt bike. There's applications for this stuff all over the place. And I don't. One of the things that I've been wanting to say, and I haven't had the platform to say it, is I've always seen Perry Parts as more than bump stops. Like, I don't want to be a direct competitor to Durabumps and Timbren and Sumo Springs. I want to be a process company. I want to be doing new polymer products, and the 4x4 space is a really awesome space because it's abusive, it's challenging. The circumstances we put our products into are really hard, and so if you can succeed there, like, going to mountain bikes is going to be almost a relief in some ways, because the challenges you have to design for are fun, like in an order of magnitude less, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been really cool to work. And that was Emmy Hall. She's got Buddy the off-road Miata. Super cool build, super cool person. Check her out. But I've done some other ones too. I did some custom Bronco ones for a limited production run for Kindred out in LA. And they're doing purpose-built upfit resto mod Broncos. And then I have some other products that are not bump stops that are in the works. Yeah, so
cool. Yeah,
Here's a
here's the
picture of the
suspension.
dyno.
Yeah. So this basically has the component that actuates the bump stop up and down, and then is the top part like a force meter, basically?
Yeah.
Force
So
over time.
well, up top you got the load cell up here.
There it is in real life.
Yeah, let's get rid of the picture. Let's pull it up. Yeah.
So you got the load cell up here, and so that measures the amount of force, right?
Mhm.
And then down here is the yoke, and so there's a 3 horsepower motor in here, and that 3 horsepower motor then moves this entire yoke assembly up and down, and then the whole thing you can adjust the amount of stroke. I'll just turn it on really quick. So you can adjust the amount of displacement, and then you can take that information, get live data out of the load cell, I think 1,000 times per second.
Wow.
I have almost got my fingers in here several times. It's really tempting.
Yeah.
And then the other really cool part, so there's a temperature meter here, which gets an IR temperature measurement of the part, which makes a huge difference because if you're shedding energy, right, that means you're turning that energy into heat, which means your part's going to heat up. And so being able to understand, how the part behaves in different temperatures and different circumstances and how fast it heats up, it's huge. It makes a big difference. So yeah, it's a really cool tool. I love it. I've been having all kinds of fun with it.
Yeah, I feel like that's going to really take your components to the next level in terms of like verifying that what you claim is true. Because you know the math behind it, you know the theory, but the actual application may be different, especially if you throw it on a 100 series that weighs 7,000 pounds and it's careening down a trail. It's going to be different, but with the dynamometer, you can stress test it, see the temperature, see what happens. So that's so cool.
And the other part of it too is being able to do cycle testing, right? Being able to simulate years worth of use, a much shorter amount of time. Like I did 100,000 cycles and I did it in a week instead of having to do it. Well, I didn't really have means to do it any other way, right? And that's something that part of the reason why I offer the no questions asked warranty, and part of the reason why I'm being so aggressive with this testing is I understand public perception about 3D printing. The barrier to entry was so low for so long that we ended up with all these really bad printers making bad parts, and that's what set out of bad material, and that is what set the perception about how this process works. And I think that if it's an uphill battle, that's okay, because I think it's a battle that's worth having, right?
That's why I was so excited to have you on, because in mechanical engineering, I learned about additive manufacturing. It was a thing. It wasn't super big 6 or 7 years ago, and now it's kind of exploding and it's everywhere. So it's really cool to be able to talk to you and see. I'm fangirling like super hard right now because this is just amazing. It's like the application of engineering to off-road stuff is what I love. It's basically my passion and mostly why I do what I do with 100s. So it's really cool to have a chance to chat with you and see the engineering behind the parts, and it's legit. It's not just some guy that said, "Hey, it's shaped like this. I'm going to print it out of some flexible resin and sell it to you for $100." You've thought about it, you've designed it, you've incorporated all the abilities that the additive manufacturing is giving you. Because injection molding, you cannot do this at all.
You can't.
You can't have internal plastics in injection molding. So
yeah, and I mean, like this image is pretty neat too. Like the internal or the integrated hardware retention, right? All the parts all the front bump stops come with the hardware pre-installed. And so you just spin them on like an oil filter, and then usually have to tighten them up with a wrench after the fact. But it's a lot easier than laying under there with a wrench, and you're trying to hold the bump stop, you're trying to get the bolt in there at the same time. There's a lot of quality of life things that you can bake into a product when you don't have to worry about, I got to machine it after the fact, or I have to do this after the fact, right? So.
Awesome. Any chance that you can give us any hints on future product lines?
Yeah, totally. So, all right. So, body mounts. Body mounts are one, really oddly expensive from factory, and two, the reason that no one else has succeeded at making, in my perspective, the reason no one else has succeeded at making effective aftermarket body mounts is either don't get the stiffness right? They're usually too stiff, or they have this property called creep in material properties, and creep determines how quickly and how much a material will permanently deform when it's under a constant load. And so with a lot of rubbers, and especially with a lot of urethanes, the creep characteristics are really poor. And what that means is if you load it up apart, you squished apart for a long time, it would eventually take that shape. Silicone doesn't do that. Silicone is very nearly creep immune, and it's substantially better than rubber in that regard. And so I have a new thing. I'm patent pending on this guy, and I still have some process stuff to figure out. But this is a composite silicone urethane body mount. And what this lets you do, so the silicone is really soft, like it's super gummy, and that allows you to get the exact same stiffness as the factory ones, because everyone loves the factory ride feel with respect to body mounts. But the flip side is, if your silicone is that soft, it's really prone to splitting. And if it's exposed to the environment, it can get chips and cracks can propagate through the silicone. And so the shell, the outer shell, is printed out of the same material as the bump stops, but it's not actually load bearing. The entire purpose is just to retain the silicone inside. And so this has been on my truck for several months now. But I've also got one sitting upstairs in a hydraulic press, just mush down to nothing. And I take it out every month and make sure that it comes back to full size. And then the last thing is I need to run these through cycle testing. And cycle testing just takes a long time. So those are the last couple of hurdles before I bring this out. I'm really excited about this one because I think it's another one of those, like, I want to address a need, and it needs to be better than what you can get on the market right now. So
is that for, like, if you wanted a body lift without compromising?
Yep, you can do a body lift. I have two different designs for 1/2 inch and 1 inch body lift with this architecture, but it's also, you can just buy them as an OEM replacement as well.
Amazing. So you're basically doing like a compressive set test to see how much it'll rebound, and has it been basically 100% back to height?
Seeing 0.5% creep.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
That's
because
really impressive.
Most or almost all of the actual modulus is coming from the silicone, right? Mm-hmm. The shell there's nothing to the shell. I mean, I can fold this guy up in my hand. It's just a protective shell, and / mold, right? It's a bit of both. So, and that's actually what those other 3D printers are retrofitted for. Is they're set up to dispense 2-part silicone, mix it through a mixing nozzle, and I'm a one-man show, so I can't be sitting there injecting these individually, right?
Yeah.
So I want to be able to load these onto a tray, put them in the machine, and hit go, and come back in an hour, and they've all been filled, right? And so I don't want to launch them until I've got that totally dialed, because that can be, if you get buried in orders and you can't make them, right? So,
yeah. Well, I think lately that body lifts are going to make a comeback. And what I mean by that is, like when I was in high school, that's the first thing everybody did was like a 2-inch or a 3-inch body lift. And then things have kind of changed with vehicles and suspensions. But now when 37s have become the new 35s, right? and everybody's trying to squeeze 37s on everything. Either you got to pick that body up or you got to cut it out, at least in the Toyota platforms generally. So I see an opportunity there.
I agree. And I feel like it's undervalued. Like, you run into people that I've seen people that they have their control arms hitting the top of their wheel well. And they're like, I can't figure out what's going on. Like, they're on the factory bump stop, whatever. Like, they're unsure what's happening. And I'm like, take a photo of your body mounts, and it's just a pancake, right? They're hot. And I think people forget that your wheels and your suspension are mounted to your frame, and your body is just kind of hanging out there, right? And you just sit in that. So it's underutilized. I don't know. It hasn't been realized yet.
Yeah.
So
You could probably, I mean, I know body mounts or body mount lifts are a pretty big thing for like unibody vehicles. You could probably get back into Subarus with that.
true. Yeah. I tried to get into bump stops for Subarus, but no one wants to tear down their coilovers to put bump stops in.
Yeah, that's a bit of a pain. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't blame them there. Yeah.
Yeah. But
So, and I know I wish I had a screenshot. I didn't take one of your site, but you've got. Can you kind of run through the list of vehicles that you have supported right now?
yeah, so it's a good number. Yeah. So Land Cruiser 80, 100, 200, the LX 450, 470, 570, which is basically 80, 100, and 200. The GX 460, 470. I've already got a design for the 550. And let's see, third gen taco, second gen taco, first gen taco. I'm working on the original pickup. And then Nissan, third gen Frontier, second gen Frontier, and I have Xterra in the works. We are about to drop a new website in like the next, it's really just me. I need to finish doing the about page. So in the next 24 to 72 hours, but they'll have, the new website will have all these other platforms that might not be on the site right now.
That's awesome.
So yeah, pretty much everything Toyota, Jeep, Wrangler, and Gladiator, and Chevy and GMC, Colorado, and Canyon.
Cool.
That's perfect. And I see Ducati on here too, which is pretty sweet.
Yeah, I had a
it's a
Ducati
gauge
Scrambler
relocation kit. Okay, cool.
Yeah, there's some other stuff just kind of sprinkled in there. I have a luggage rack for my adventure motorcycle. I have what else do I have? There's a thing called a cush rubber in motorcycles, and what it does is it goes between the drive hub and the wheel. And I own this really weird, rare dual sport motorcycle that they made for 1 year, and they don't make those parts anymore. And so I just started making them because people were they couldn't find them, and they were not able to ride their motorcycles anymore. So
that's very cool. And so you mentioned it earlier, but so if somebody's watching and their vehicle was not in that list, but they'd like for it to be, they just need to reach out to you?
Yeah, Patrick at perryparts.com. And then the whole deal is send me a couple of photos. I will send you a standard or a slightly modified offering of what we currently have, so that way I have something to baseline off of. And then we'll iterate from there.
Excellent.
And the whole deal is you get a free set if you help me get into a new vehicle platform.
Awesome.
That's pretty cool. Pretty cool. All right. Well, Patrick, before we let you go here, let's run through our rapid fire questions to wrap this up. So we were talking about you were East Coast, then you went West Coast. Now you're back East Coast. This could cause a lot of discussion with this question. Favorite trail that you've wheeled to date?
I mean, I gotta say I did some stuff out by Strawberry Pass, but I also really liked the Rubicon. West Coast
that's
wheeling
a safe answer. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very safe answer. But West Coast wheeling has a lot more grip, and out here it's a lot more rowdy. It's muddy, it's slick, it's loose.
And we're proud of it being rowdy, by the way. So,
yeah. I like it. I had a lot of really good memories out near Strawberry Pass, though, out in Tahoe. So I'll say that.
That's awesome. You've been tinkering pretty much forever. Aside from bump stops, what's your favorite vehicle modification on the GX?
Well, I cut the lower control arm mounts and moved the front axles forward an inch so I could get the tires in without having to do a body mount shop. That was kind
Sweet. And it,
yeah.
substantial caster increase. Yeah.
Well, I have the SPC upper control arms, so I just rolled those forward, so that took all the caster back to normal.
My buddy they make those. They make like a new subframe for tacos. I don't know what gen,
that's
but
cool.
my buddy has one, and you literally like cut out all the mounts that basically what you did, and you weld in this new thing, and it shifts everything forward.
Huh.
Yeah.
Nice.
So.
That's awesome. I would say that maybe a snorkel. Yeah.
All right. John, I noticed you didn't have anything to say about those SPC control arms. I'm going to let that slide. John has a love-hate relationship with those control arms.
I think SPC is a fantastic company. You know, they're Colorado. Everything they do is in America. I really enjoy their design. I like the customization, the adjustability. But I blew through 2 ball joints in 5,000 miles. So
I have a very similar experience. And I'll say from the product design perspective, it's really, I think that they do a good job of fixing it. I think the one thing that I would love for them to do is explain it to people what they changed. Like if they posted a cross section of, because I know that I've heard from several people that they've updated the ball joint, but they should like cross section one and show us. And I think that will help build a lot more faith in what changed. That's the reason why I cut my parts in half.
I mean,
right?
seeing
like,
it, it's all the difference. Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
They have I think the 100 series ball joint is like their newer design, and I've heard that they're making an even newer one that isn't out yet. And they do have a cross section somewhere in like an FAQ, and they basically have play out the box because there's a spring. Not to get too deep into it, but there's like a wear spring that keeps the ball joint like where it needs to be. But if you push down on top of the upper control arm at full droop, like it'll move. So the failure is actually the axial, like side to side, like in and out, or whichever way you want to. But yeah, I mean, I went out and got like a dial caliper and took a video, and I was like, hey, like, what's going on? He's like, new set on the way. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like, that's nice, but I don't want to deal with this. So,
although I will say it's easier to take off that big nut on top than to press out a ball joint.
Yes, it is. It's so easy that it knocks out of place at Windrock. But anyway,
I've had that happen too. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I shouldn't open that can of worms.
You get 2 engineers on something they like, but you know, yeah.
So Patrick, what I'll change the subject here. We'll go from control arms to camp meals. What's your go-to camping meal, favorite meal when you're out for a weekend?
Well, you know, I overland, so I have to have a scuttle. Like you're legally obligated to. No, I made a really good steak and eggs for breakfast one time on the scuttle. And then I did stir fry one time. That was stellar. You put it right in the fire, so it was just ripping hot, and just tossed everything in there, got it moving, take it out, and then just don't touch the scuttle until the fire goes out. But those were two that stood out to me as being pretty memorable.
That's a lot better than Kai's answer.
I forgot about that. Yes.
Doesn't he eat like Campbell's soup things cold? Isn't that what it was?
With some kind of I'm sorry, Kai. I don't remember which flavor it was, but it was it was cold soup.
Because he wants to rough it. I love the reason. The reason's perfect. But yeah, steak and eggs is hard to beat. I've done that a few times.
I'm one of those folks that will I rough it, but like not with the food, but I don't have like the drawers and the lights on the interior. Like I just have a plywood platform. For a little while, my wife and I slept on, I had like packaging foam, like from a gun case. And I just put all that down like on with like hot glue. And I just had that down on the platform. And eventually she was like, no, we're getting a mattress. But
you didn't tell her that you were going to print one?
It wasn't there yet.
That's awesome.
You know, John posts more pictures of steaks and preparing his meat than maybe he does of his truck. So yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Switching gears once again. What's your favorite season for overlanding? Is it winter when there's no bugs, but it's cold? Summer, it's probably a little coast dependent as well, I would imagine.
It's very coast dependent. So out west, I actually really liked winter wheeling. My only complaint was that California closed a lot of stuff. It was really hard to find things that were open. But winter wheeling was really awesome because once you go 35s, it starts to get a lot harder to get into trouble without blowing up a diff. Ask me how I know. And so with winter wheeling, you can get into all sorts of trouble, and you can do it on a flat road. It's a lot of fun. And especially out west, I say, because the West Coast powder is really awesome to just bomb through. Mm-hmm. Out here, the snow is dense, and I buried my truck up to the frame in mashed potatoes snow, and it was a tough
mashed potatoes.
And so out here, I would say fall. Fall is really awesome here. It's super pretty, especially when the foliage just starts to drop. You can get a view, and the wet leaves make things a little bit more challenging too. You got to be a little bit more careful about your line choice. So I would say fall on the East Coast.
You know where fall's prettiest on the East Coast? In East Tennessee.
New England. Oh.
you had the correct answer.
Yeah. I was trying to set up a plug here for the folks in the South. If you want to meet Patrick, he was telling us that he will be, can I say this, in attendance at Cruisers on the Rocks this year. So
I think the fourth one.
Yeah. So shout out to Lee and Cruisers, and you can meet Patrick and check out the bump stops at Windrock this year. All right, final question. So mechanic, engineer, tinkerer, your favorite tool in your kit, favorite go-to tool in your arsenal.
Can't say 3D printer.
No. That's a good one though. I mean, so I've got a couple of welders. I use them a lot, but I would say if there was one thing I couldn't live without, Milwaukee 3/8" stubby impact. Best damn tool. That thing comes out all the time.
We just became
very
best
team
friends.
red.
You guys,
it's a great tool.
Kai was on my team DeWalt, and now, Patrick's. Oh. All right.
Yeah, I have a disgusting amount of Milwaukee tools.
Once you get one, you might as well get the rest, right? You already bought the batteries.
Why not? Yeah.
I have a DeWalt FlexVolt, the 60-volt angle grinder. That is a great tool. I love that thing. But,
yeah. DeWalt makes some good rotating assemblies. Their little mini cutter, their cutoff wheel tool, torque test channel, it blows everybody out of the water substantially. But I'll never buy one. So.
All right, I might let you borrow it. All right, guys, I think that wraps us up. Patrick said Patrick at perryparts.com, Perry Parts on Instagram. And thanks again, man, for coming on. This was fun.
This was awesome.
This was great. It was great getting to meet you guys. I hope to meet you in person sometime soon. Thanks for the opportunity. I love getting to share a little bit about my product, process, etc. So,
Cool.
Awesome.
All right. Till next time.